Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this week's office hours. Really appreciate your time. We have a couple of announcements from the Semantic Kernel side before we dive into open Q&A and looking forward to hearing from you. So I just want to remind everyone of the format that we have. We have this weekly office hour session from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time every week for individuals to join in. We usually have a few announcements from the team and then open Q&A. And I also want to highlight that on the second Wednesday of every month, we have our APAC office hours. That's from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. And so if you do have individuals who are based in the APAC time region, feel free to share on that calendar invite as well. Do want to highlight we have a new .NET release. There's a number of changes, but one I want to highlight in particular is the added example of structured outputs with Azure OpenAI. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at this release, we recommend you take some time to do that as well. And then I highlighted last time the Python release, but just want to highlight this again, that there is a package out for Python that has some added support for streaming OpenAI assistants and then Anthropic function calling updates as well. And so if you haven't had a chance within Python to take a look at that, we recommend doing that as well. I'll put some links in chat shortly to that has the releases and everything as well. Within our documentation, we've been working through both our vector search and some of our other pieces to be able to go and update. And so if you haven't had a chance to look through documentation, as you can see on the left-hand side, we've been further updating our table of context. And so there are pieces within text search and others that we've been building out as well. I just wanted to highlight, and I dropped a link to that in chat as well. And then, as always, our backlog by bucket, if you're wanting to see our different items that we have in the backlog and want to understand our roadmap, this is a great space to be able to come and see from all of our different buckets, from agents and from AI services and others of what we're working on as well. And so if you do want to dive in further and see our roadmap, that's a great place to be able to go. With that, I do want to highlight a number of blogs that we've released since we met last time. There is an update around Microsoft.extensions.ai. And so with our .NET partners, we're really excited to be able to announce this new collaboration. And so I've linked in chat to the blog post to be able to look through this one and others. We also have updated documentation for our agent framework. Know that a lot of individuals have been looking into agents. We've seen a lot of questions both in office hours and in Discord and in our GitHub discussions as well. And so wanted to announce out to the community that update. And then the last blog post I want to highlight is there's some great work that EY and Semantic Kernel did together in partnership within Microsoft Sela and looking through some of EY's processes. And so EY has released out a blog post, and so we have a customer case study that's featuring their work that they've done there as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and actually turn it over to Ben to go through a couple of updates around Dapper. Ben, do you want me to stop sharing?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, sure, go ahead. I can
Okay,
share my
yeah,
screen.
no worries. Okay, perfect. I'll let you go ahead and share and take it from there.
Great. So I just wanted to show a couple of the updates that we have made to the process framework. Primarily the Dapper runtime. Let me get my screen sharing here. Everyone see my screen?
I can see it now. Can
Yeah, we
others
do.
see it as well?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay. So Dapper runtime for our processes. So I just want to show we have a demo here that shows how to run it and how to add processes to your program, which is running Dapper. It is here under .NET samples and then demos, and it's called Process with Dapper. So this kind of walks through sort of what the sample is. It's a very sort of simple process, but it's just showing you sort of how you can add it into Dapper and then execute it with Dapper. And so let me jump down to the bottom real quick to show the code that it takes to actually add the process to Dapper. It's not very much code. You need to, if you're already using processes, then you probably already have these first two packages, and you'll need to grab this last package, which is semantic kernel.process.runtime.dapper. and then, set up Dapper like you normally would in your service. If you're using .NET in a service, you probably already have something that looks like this for adding Dapper into your service. Once you do this, all that you need to do to add processes to it is this one line of code. So you basically just add the actors that are needed to run processes, and then that's it. You can basically run the processes like you normally would. And so here are sort of some logs that kind of show what it looks like when you run this thing within Dapper. These are logs that make more sense when you see the actual code, but it's sort of A step, B step, and C step from this diagram here. And you can see that this all runs like you would expect it to. So I can run the demo also here, I believe. Okay, so just to kind of walk through really quickly how the demo is set up. This is an ASP.NET website API, and so we've set it up with a controller, and so you can kick it off by basically making a GET request to processes and then process ID, and that will kick off this process. So this is the sort of simple process that I showed. It's got 4 steps in it, which are all sort of defined here, and they're writing out console output. So I can kick this off. Pull up the logs here. And you can see it is running. And there you go, we got to the end of it. So one of the things to kind of call out here is that another feature that we have added in as part of this release is the ability to set up state. So initial state on a step when you add the step. So you can see, let me actually start. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. This one here. So C step, we are creating this step and we're adding it to our process. But when we do that, we're saying you should start out with your initial state that looks like this. So current cycle equals 1. You can see that in the logs here. So the first time that the process runs, it gets set up and it gets activated and it has its cycle set to 1. And then the whole process basically loops until that hits 3 and then it's done. This is also stateful. If you take a look at the C step here, C step, you can see that it is a stateful step. It's got this C step state here, and it's doing activate async, and it has the actual state object is this guy, C step state. It's got current cycle. So this process is now stateful. So since I ran it and it finished, it has state which has been saved from running. So if I kick off the same process again with the same ID, do that now, you can see it starts running again. But this time, when C step gets run, it is initialized with the state that it had from the previous run. And so cycle was already set to 3, and so the process ended. So that shows that the steps are now stateful and being persisted within Dapper. Okay, I think that is it for the demo part. Any questions from anyone on that?
I'm not seeing any in chat. Would anyone want to come off of mute? Would love to hear from you. Hey, Gary, see your hand if you want to come off of mute.
Yeah, thanks. So just for looking at how that code executed, was that synchronous or were the events being handled async? Because I saw that the output was going and then you hit the last line on the endpoint.
When you say synchronous, what do you?
What I mean is, so it's an event-based model, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so was everything waiting for each of those steps to execute at the beginning, and then at the end, once it was all complete, you got to the end of your request?
Mm.
Is
Oh,
that
I
correct?
see. Yeah. So when you kick off the process, there's actually two different ways to do it, right? So you can sort of start it running and then just let it run, or you can start it running and then wait for it to finish. And that's what I did here in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a look at the process stuff there, the presentation I think Evan gave a few weeks ago. I'm trying to understand the connection between the processes and semantic kernel, and I say that because what you just showed, you could run that if semantic kernel didn't exist as a thing. Do you know what I'm saying? In other
Yeah.
words, there was no LLM involved. There was no AI involved. It was
Yes.
a messaging library abstraction, which there is values in those. I'm just not understanding the connection or why semantic kernel is doing that.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. So that is a good question. So I think the key is that the steps within our process are all built around the kernel function, right? Which is our sort of unit of work. And so us building this process framework makes it very easy to organize processes and to create this sort of process framework that is all constructed around artifacts that you've already created, right? Kernel functions that know how to do things, AI, right, integrations. And so the other thing is like you can use function calling within the process to help to help decide which flow of the process to take next. And so that's really kind of the key concept, right? Is that since it's all based on this kernel uh, and kernel functions, building the process that way allows you to use AI pretty simply to help direct the process and to help pick which routes to take next.
Yeah, what that also means is that you can use not just AI of calling models, APIs, regular code. I can have an agents or mini agents or multi-agents inside of a step. So now I can actually have not just call out to services, which you can do from Semantic Kernel, but I can have my agents go do work, create artifacts, and then have another agent or many agents below that go and review that work, provide feedback, or even human in the loop. So that's why finish it off a simple example just to get people going. And we didn't want people for the sample to have to go bring in a bunch of keys and do a bunch of other stuff. Like just here's a super simple way, like you mentioned, to get started to understand the concepts of eventing, because not everybody does that on a day-to-day basis. And then once you get that, like Ben mentioned, then you can use the whole power of the entire kernel in any language.
Okay. So sorry to harp on about this because messaging is a big thing. I'm quite involved with it. Messaging, I do quite a bit in my day job. And so I know how complicated it can be. So I'm just curious as to, are you looking to build this out as a full messaging stack, like being able to do retries and monitoring, etc.? Because it ends up being quite a large domain is what I'm trying to get at. And so I'm just curious as to whether, so for example, I mean, a lot of people in .NET space may be using End Service Bus as an example for their messaging stack, or others, maybe mass transit or other things like that. So how would you envisage people who have already got investments in those areas? Because if you're doing messaging, chances are you're using one of those. And so you'd want to integrate into your own existing infrastructure as opposed to maybe bringing in another messaging platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That does make sense. And so cloud events is going to be how we're going to do that basically. So let's see if someone wants to give a link to the backlog. I think we have a work item on there that's probably coming up next week. That'll integrate the process framework with cloud events, which is sort of like the industry standard that's used amongst probably all of those messaging platforms that you called out. And so we're going to sort of integrate with those in that way. And the key is, you know, it should be like a pretty lightweight link there, right? It's not that we don't have to sort of build this thing into those systems, right? We just have to be able to sort of, you know, communicate with them over cloud events.
Okay,
Does that
thanks.
make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, sort of. Yeah. Thanks.
Great, thanks for the question, Gary. Others who may have questions or thoughts as well. I'm not seeing anything in chat related to this. There's some other items we'll get to, but just was curious if anyone else had any questions or thoughts. If not, we'll just dive into open Q&A, but as folks are thinking through this, feel free to add in other questions as well. Wanted to thank Andrew for the demo that you put in chat and the GitHub repo. Thank you for sharing, looks great. And so if there's anything you want to share on that, Andrew, feel free to come off of mute as well. Great, I'm just looking through. I'm not seeing other questions. Are there other things that folks have questions on or working on like the feedback from the Semantic Kernel team? Hey, Brett, if you want to go and come off of me, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So I've kind of got a couple questions here. So first off, just saw, this 1.24.1 release. So I was doing an upgrade for my package from 1.21.1, and I'm noticing that now the content filter results for prompt class does not seem to be in the project anymore, and I don't see any notes about that in any of the release notes for 1.22 to 1.24.1. So I'm curious, has something changed there? Is that something on the OpenAI side that I have to look at, or where I can find those content filter results and what class I should be using for those now for our metadata? And then the second question I have is related to streaming. So I've seen in your repo, you guys have an example for the function invocation filter with streaming. I'm curious if you have anything similar for the telemetry side of things, because you have the one telemetry example for capturing token usage and things like that. But your streaming example just shows how you can override the stream, which it also is showing it as a stream of integers, which I was a bit confused by in that example as well. So maybe an explanation and some clarity there would be much appreciated.
Great, yeah, thanks for both of the questions. For the first one around the release, Mark, do you want to take for the content pieces and what was noted within the release of with that as well?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the content filter results is missing. Is that a class that's coming from the OpenAI SDK, or I'm not familiar with that particular abstraction.
Oh, possibly. There's a chance it was. So yeah, maybe I need to update that OpenAI package as well. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, I mean, there's check the namespace, right? If it's a semantic kernel, nothing should have disappeared from semantic kernel. Like, we have checks in place so that if any of our public APIs are changed, our builds will fail, right? So we can do it deliberately, but we're generally very aware of it. But if you're going to the underlying SDK, there is a little bit. We've seen a little bit of churn in the OpenAI SDK, and we've been caught out a couple of times, right? But maybe check that out and then get back to us if there is an issue on the semantic kernel side.
Yeah, I can take a look because I saw because it's from the usage or from the metadata. So that's where I'd assumed it was all still within the semantic kernel package. Because, for example, the usage for like token usage, that one did change, but I saw there was a note about that in the release notes. So yeah, this content filter results for prompts, since I think it is from the Azure filter or the Azure AI filters, it may be something that's on their side. So I'll look into that.
Okay.
Perfect. And if you do have any further issues on that, Brett, feel free to put it in GitHub discussions as well, and we can triage it. And then your second question around telemetry and streaming, Tao or Roger, do either of you want to take that one as well?
Yeah, hello. You mentioned a sample. Could you send me? Could you let me know which sample you're referring to?
Yep, so I'll post them in chat here. So this is the one that I was looking at that has the streaming function invocation filter example. And then the second one I'm going to share here is the actual telemetry example that you guys shared here. So for this telemetry one, that's where, yeah, like it's got that usage and it's tracking tokens and things like that. So I've already got something built like that for that non-streaming side. I'm just curious on the streaming side of things. I saw in one of the releases up to 124, you guys had added usage metadata for streaming chunks. I just wasn't sure how to access that and the best way to actually implement that kind of filter.
Oh, so this the way you're using telemetry is through filter. I think to answer that question, maybe Dmitro is the best person.
Yeah, I can jump in. So regarding the telemetry, basically this example is just in a case when you want some like addition in telemetry in your application, but out of the box, like all of the streaming and non-streaming logic in Semantic Kernel already has built-in telemetry. So I would probably suggest you check this first, and then see if there's like anything remaining you want to add to your application. You can just like build the logging filter or something like that and add additional telemetry. But the telemetry that is presented in an example, basically it's already existed out of the box, and it should be supported in streaming as well.
Yep. So yeah, so I've already got, and so yeah, the main reason is we've got an Azure App Insights. We're posting the telemetry for our token usage and function duration and all that sort of stuff in App Insights. So that's that's kind of our reason for it. So yeah, I saw that we can access the usage, but I guess I'm curious, like, since those tokens are going to be coming back in chunks, is that something where like similar to what you had in your function invocation filter for streaming, we basically just have to override the context result and be processing it each time? Or is it something where like, yeah, what is the best way to actually track those tokens as they're coming back in those streaming chunks if I wanted to send that all to Azure OpenAI, or sorry, Azure App Insights?
Yeah, I think in case of streaming scenario, I think like the information about token usage comes with the last chunk. Chao, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I think like we added. Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, so which means that probably when you have a streaming, you need to like check the each chunk instance, and then check if the telemetry is present in metadata. And if yes, then it means that it's probably the last chunk. So then you can use that, but it's not going to be present in each chunk because the token usage is not available in the middle of the streaming process. It's basically available already in the end. So if it will be helpful, I can focus on it today in the next couple of days, and then create another example how to do the similar logging for the streaming scenario. And it will be kind of similar with the example we already have with non-streaming, if that will be helpful.
Yeah, that would be much
appreciated.
Right, bro?
Yeah, sorry, it is for .NET, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so
and yeah,
you get streaming in Python already. We've out of the box. Evan can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, that would be much appreciated. And sorry, the last question I just remembered is there in a function invocation filter an easy way to identify if the function that was triggered or that's calling that filter was a streaming function or a non-streaming function? Because from what I saw, there was some things you could kind of look at with the result, but it wasn't 100% clear how you could differentiate between the two.
Yeah, we actually have a task for that. And I think we are going to add additional flag that will indicate whether this function was invoked from streaming or non-streaming scenario in order to work better with the result, know how to override the result and so on. So I think like we're going to add it in one of the upcoming releases as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for the questions. I see we have another hand up. If you want to come off of mute, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. The first one, I have a chat completion agent that uses a plugin, and that plugin have some functions that create a rather long list of tasks. So a long time it's not possible to keep that in chat history. So before that, just for test, I cleared the history every single time, but then of course I can't make any follow-up questions. I've been looking at the history reducer on the agent, but that reduces just until some number of instances of history. Is there a way to get rid of only tool call data using the history reducer, or some way you can see the communication back and forward, but not keep the raw data that was used to produce those answers?
Rasmus, Chris here. That's a good question. Currently, we don't have that functionality, although coincidentally, I actually ran across kind of a similar solution where I wanted to discard the function results and not maintain them in the history. Currently, you would need to implement the history reducer interface and have a custom implementation. But I think based on your input, I'll put an item on our backlog to address that. I think that's an insightful option. I know Mark's also looking at some reducer patterns more generally, so I can sync with Mark and we can review how to best move forward on that. I think that's a great suggestion.
Oh, that would be really cool. My second question is about dates and prompts, system prompts. These data I have in the previous example do have dates on them that are over. Some of them are overdue, some are not. And I'm trying to tell the LLM, please tell me what is overdue and what is not. It seems like it completely ignores it. Is there any specific format we need to have dates in? Is it epoch seconds? Is it data and offset or something?
Are using we've got an out-of-the-box plugin for the agent to know what the date is. Are you using that too, so that way the agent knows like what today is?
Yes, it already knows what the day is. But I'm fearing perhaps it's because it's nullable dates, but I don't know if I tried every single way of trying to tell them this means that this date is before this date, but it seems to not react to it in any way.
Mark or Ben, do you have any thoughts on how to be able to resolve that?
Sorry, I don't. Could we, if you don't mind, could we get an issue created for this and we can look into it?
Yes, I can definitely do
Yeah,
that.
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Perfect. Thank you
some
so
of the
much.
sample will be helpful. And then do you have telemetry enabled too to see what's being passed back and forth? I wonder if somehow the date's getting missed of like what is today. Because I know for me, a lot of times I can, if I do that and I say, hey, what's next week? The agent knows, oh, today is whatever, 10/23, next week's the 31st, you know, and it can generally do that.
Yeah, I can also get it to do that. It's more when the data comes back from a plugin, it gets the data back, it serializes as JSON, and then trying to take that JSON and turn it into something to begin to compare there. And that's where it seems to fail. If I tell it, hey, what is next week's date, it works, but it's more when it needs to compare a long list of dates in some JSON format with current date. But I will make an issue and we can take it from there.
Perfect. Thanks for the questions. And yeah, thank you in advance for making that issue. We can go through and look into it further. Other questions folks may have. I'm not seeing any in chat, but feel free to post them in there and I can read them out, or would love to have individuals come off of me. Would love to hear other questions or other thoughts you may have as you're going through using Semantic Kernel. If we don't have any other questions, I see a good number of folks on. Is there anything the individuals are working on that they'd like to share of how they're thinking about semantic kernel, or if they've started to explore the process framework as well? Would love to hear from you.
I'd say also, while you're thinking about your use of semantic kernel, if you are attending Ignite, definitely let us know. We'll have our couple team members there, so we'd love to meet up with you if you're going to be attending in person. And we'll put out a blog post in the next week or so with the links to all of the semantic kernel sessions. So if you're not attending in person, you can watch live or on demand.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Evan. Is anyone attending in person? I'm not seeing anything in chat, but if folks are, do let us know. But if not, all the content will be available digitally as well within Ignite. So we'll give it a couple more minutes, just if folks are typing or if you're thinking through different questions. But just want to provide the opportunity if folks have any thoughts around to be able to come off of me. We'd love to hear from you. But we'll give it a couple more minutes before closing out the session. Oh, I see a hand. Hey, Britt, if you want to come off of mute, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the call here, but so yeah, I double checked, and that content filter result for prompt is in the Azure AI OpenAI namespace. So I guess I'm curious then, because my solution, we're referencing strictly the semantic kernel package. We're not actually referencing Azure AI OpenAI in our CS proj. So it seems like that upgrade from 1.21.1 to 1.24.1 changed that reference, which changed something on the Azure OpenAI side. So I guess my question would be then, do you guys have kind of a recommendation for how we should be referencing both semantic kernel and our own Azure OpenAI package in our solution for something like this? Because again, to clarify, this is for the content filter that is set up on the Azure OpenAI side.
Yeah, I can talk really quick on this. So the recommendation on that is that since our connectors are rely on beta packages, you use the same beta version that our latest release, or the release that you are using with, is aligned with. So we try to keep the latest as much as possible. So the recommendation would be to align the same version that we kind of deployed our packages with your actual direct dependence on Azure package.
Okay, sounds good.
Perfect. Thanks for the follow-up, Brett, and the question as well. Really appreciate it. Seeing a question in chat from Han that they're currently looking at the auto invocation filter from Semantic Kernel on the blog, and they just shared the feedback that it's been improved since the last iteration. However, there's other functionality that they're not familiar with besides the next function call that Semantic Kernel uses. And so thank you for the link to that as well. Are there any other insights you want to provide to before we dive into the question? I see Dimitros coming off of mute, but would love to hear if there's anything else you want to add to that before we dive in.
There's nothing else to add. I think just things like the request sequence and function sequence or any other functionality that can be used from the auto invocation filter. The one that I'm using is the function call and the function name, which is very useful, but there's other things that I'm not familiar with that's been added in. As mentioned, there's lots of sequence kind of data. From my point of view, it's probably the order that the semantic kernel is calling the functions, but maybe you guys can elaborate if that's correct.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, like there is a documentation on each of that property, but in case it's not clear, we will probably improve it. So basically, during the function calling operation, there are 2 loops. Basically, there's outer loop and inner loop. So outer loop, it's like the request loop, which means that, for example, imagine like you have some ask, for example, and then you send a request, and you have a couple of functions. So the model may decide to call one function, and then this one function will be invoked. The result will be sent back to the model, and then the model will decide that it needs to call another function. So this is kind of the outer loop. It's request loop, and this request sequence index means like the number of the operation, basically the number of the current request, which means that, for example, for the first request, this will be 0. And then if a model decides to call another function, for example, then it's going to be 1 and so on. So this is the counter for this outer loop. And then the inner loop, it's like, for example, you send a request, and then the model decides to call 3 functions at once. At the moment, those functions will be called sequentially, but I know we have a PR open to enable parallel function calling as well. But as for now, these functions will be called sequentially, and this function sequence index means like the number of function that is currently called. For example, if for specific requests there are like 3 functions to call, they will be called sequentially, and then this function index will be like 0, then 1, and then 2. That makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Really appreciate it. Any other questions folks may have, feel free to put them in chat or come off of mute. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, hey, Britt, I see your question in chat. Do you want to come off of mute to elaborate? I'm happy to read it out as well, whatever is easiest.
Yeah, no worries. Again, my apologies for hijacking here, but just
No worries.
double checking. And so Azure AI, OpenAI version 2 is the last full release, which I have locally, and I can see that this content filter results for prompt classes in there. So is the release version of Semantic Kernel depending on a beta version of Azure OpenAI?
Yes, our latest release, starting from 1.18, is already dependent on the OpenAI and Azure OpenAI 2.1 beta. So I can be wrong here, or maybe 1.22. But yeah, our latest versions already depends on the beta 2.1 from those two.
Yeah, we use the 2.0 bit. Oh, good, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, so what happened is that when 2.0 got released, some experimental functionality was actually removed from the packages. So that would have been a breaking change for semantic kernel users. So what we did is we added, like, 2.1 is ahead of the 2.0 release, so we added a dependency on that. That's kind of like the latest and greatest. So that's why it does look a little bit funny that we're depending on the beta rather than the official GA, but there are downsides to depending on the GA.
Yeah, we want to make sure that the agents in particular, because those are in preview, they didn't make it into the 2.0 non-beta, and we know a lot of people use that. So it's the same calls behind the scenes. Again, there are some new updates, but we'll stay on this until everything is locked in from the Azure AI team.
Makes sense. So is there a time, or is there a plan to switch back to the non-beta versions in the future, or is that something where you guys are, again, just kind of stuck with whatever the Azure OpenAI team is pushing out there?
Yes, once the core functionality is in the non-beta one, so for example, things like agents, that's when we'll move. We intentionally decided and worked with that team not to move because we didn't want to, again, to Mark's point, like have everyone have to shift, make breaking changes, and not allow you to use agents anymore from Azure, which again, we see a lot of people are doing that.
Yep, no, makes sense for sure. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for the question. I really appreciate it. Other questions folks may have, feel free to add in chat or to come off of mute as well. We'd love to hear from you. I'm seeing a question in chat, Gary, around some of the autogen experimental work versus semantic kernel. How we would just address the between the two is really autogen, as you mentioned, it is experimental. It is a research project from Microsoft Research, and so any of the work that they're doing is not production ready. So that's really where semantic kernel of any of the multi-agent work or work that has been released down some of our recent documentation on agents is really production ready and ready to implement there. So there may be new experimental pieces like you're saying that AutoGen is going through with, and that will eventually be baked in pieces into semantic kernel as well. Is there further questions other than that new framework that you have about the two?
So it was my understanding that it was a more of a research project to experiment with different ideas. But I mean, looking at their site, it doesn't seem to give that vibe anymore. It seems like they're looking for. I mean, yes, they've got a new experimental one at the moment because they just brought it out. But once that's gone past preview, it looks like they're looking for people to use that as a production library, and they support C# and Python, which I think before they were mostly just a Python option. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, we've been working with them on .NETs, so that way people can experiment with .NETs. I'd say go look at the transparency document. They try to make it really clear that it's for experimental use cases.
Oh, is there a link for that? Because that'd be good.
Yeah, Evan, thanks for putting that in chat as well. But yeah, just to kind of highlight on that again, I would just say, as you mentioned, it is experimental. It's a research project, and so taking any dependencies on it in terms of for production is not the intent, not recommended, versus semantic kernel that is fully production ready with that as well. Thanks for the question. Other questions folks may have? Give it a few more minutes if folks are typing as well, but we'd love to hear from both folks too. I know we have about 15 minutes left if there are additional questions. Hey, Jason, thanks for raising your hand. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple of guys and I are working on a workshop that's going to be basically a day-long workshop in the Boston area in November and then again in December. We're planning on using and focusing on semantic kernel, more or less getting started with it, focusing a lot on the RAG scenarios, use cases, and then getting into the agent framework. We probably won't get into the process framework just because we want to stick it to one day. And we do want them to walk out of there knowing how to use it so that they could start using it on a day-to-day basis afterwards. We're working on, so we've got like 2/3 of it together for a common thread, but with the agent stuff, we're trying to figure out how to work it into more or less keeping one domain of examples throughout the day so they kind of build on each other. So we're looking for any reference workshops out there that anyone knows of semantic kernel. Of course, we've looked at the Microsoft Learn stuff out there, and all of the examples that you guys have in the code base is really, really beneficial to us. It's just we're trying to refactor and kind of make it so it makes sense to the users and they can walk out with some code base. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if anyone on the calls from the Boston area. It's going to be only in person, but I might be asking some more questions out in the Discord channel to try to pick people's brains about a day-long workshop and what they'd like to see in it.
That's amazing, Jason. Yeah, if you have feedback that you want from community, really recommend going to Discord to be able to chat with others of what they've done, what's worked well. If you have any asks that are for the Semantic Kernel team, specifically, I would just recommend using GitHub discussions there. Would love to be able to help you with any content. We do have some internal teams that have been delivering as well. If the hackathon that you're running is open, do let me know. I'm happy to share it on our Semantic Kernel blog if you're looking for individuals to sign up still. As well, happy to help there. But in terms of the agent pieces, I know we have Chris on, and I think we may have Evan M on for Python as well. But are there specific examples that you've seen that you're wanting to be able to bring in, or in terms of agent, are there specific asks that you have other than just having one kind of sample that builds from concept to concept for the day? Is there anything in particular on agents that you would look for that?
No, I guess we're not that far on the agent side. I don't have any specific asks. I just I might next week. But we have not publicized it out on Meetup yet. It's going to be on the Boston Azure Meetup is where it's going to show up. Yeah, anyways, we're still going back and forth on the complete agenda, and we do want to get it out this week. And I'll let you guys know when it's out there. But yeah,
Perfect.
thanks.
Yeah, just let us know how we can help as well.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in chat. Does anyone else want to come off of mute to either share what they're working on, questions, or like Jason said as well, ideas that they're working on that need brainstorming or ideas from the team? Would love to hear from you. If there aren't any more questions, I'll stay on in case anyone's typing. But if there aren't any more, we can go ahead and end this week's office hours. Just want to thank everyone for joining in, everyone from the Semantic Kernel team for attending, Ben for going through the DAPR piece as well. Do you see we have another hand if you want to come off of mute?
Hi, do you hear me now?
Yeah, hey, Romeo, we can hear you.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay, cool. So I wanted to ask, do we have any additional libraries or extensions for Semantic Kernel for text chunking other than the text chunker, which is in Semantic Kernel? I am asking about that partially because I am creating my own solution using semantic chunking, which is something similar to what Python already has with spacey encoders and tokenizers. And I am considering publishing this when I actually complete this solution. And I'm thinking if there's any library I could contribute to, or maybe just deploy my own solution.
Yeah, there is. I just put a link in the chat for you. So kernel memory is very widely used by thousands of enterprises today. It's an example library for code. It does all types of chunking, semantic chunking. There's a ton of users on there, a big community around it. I would start there, take a look and see what you think. And then definitely if there's things that are missing, I know the team over there would be happy for you to contribute.
Okay, thanks.
It uses semantic kernel under the hood, and it's also upgrading to our latest memory 1.0 packages that are coming out.
Great. Thanks so much, Romeo, for the question. Any other questions folks may have? If not, I'll stay on just to see if there are any lingering individuals who are typing and want to come off of mute, but just want to thank everyone again for attending this week's office hours, and we look forward to talking with you next week. In the interim between now and next week, if you have questions or items that come up for the Semantic Kernel team, feel free to use GitHub discussions as we triage that daily. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.